More than pleased, I'm delighted to call this hearing to order. And Senator Capito will testify. I don't often say I'm delighted to be chairing a hearing, but today I am. This is great stuff, and we're grateful to our witnesses that are here, and grateful to Senator Capito and her team, and the folks that are on our staff as well. But today's hearing is focused on the next frontier of tackling climate change, decarbonizing the industrial sector of our economy. And our hearing is timely, as well, as some of you may know. Yesterday, the Biden administration issued the fifth National Climate Assessment, which underscored the urgency of addressing climate change and the benefits of doing so. The report found that adjusting for inflation in the 1980s, the United States experienced $1 billion disaster every 4 months on average. That's $1 billion disaster every 4 months on average. Today, there is one every 3 weeks. Every 3 weeks. The report also found that if we're going to limit the increases of global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is our goal, our country must reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. So why should we focus on reducing industrial emissions? To answer that question, let me begin by sharing an age-old story of Willie Sutton. I've told this story once or twice in this room. Some of you may recall he was a notorious bank robber during the Great Depression and robbed a lot of banks, finally got caught, and ended up in front of the judge. And the judge said to him, Mr. Sutton, why do you rob banks? And he said, Your Honor, that's where the money is. And I think that's a story that's actually worth retelling today. But and that the Willie Sutton's logic actually can apply here for us as well. Heavy industry makes products that are central to our lives, including steel, cement, and aluminum. And at the same time, the industrial sector is responsible for nearly 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions and represents the third largest source of U.S. emissions, trailing only the transportation and power sectors. By 2030, the industrial sector is expected to become the largest source of domestic greenhouse gas emissions. I'll just say that again. By 2030, 7 years from now, the industrial sector is expected to become the largest source of domestic greenhouse gas emissions. As many of us know, there are real challenges when it comes to decarbonizing the industrial sector. For example, because of the diverse industrial processes we use to make a variety of goods and materials, there isn't a simple one-size-fits-all approach. Instead, we must deploy a variety of different technologies and process changes. Yet, within these challenges also lies real opportunities. In addition to helping us meet our climate goals, reducing industrial emissions presents great opportunities for us to invest in. And making investments in, among other things, American industry in order to boost our nation's economic competitiveness. The benefits of decarbonizing key industrial materials goes beyond simply mitigating emissions at individual facilities. By producing materials in cleaner ways, we can reduce emissions throughout our supply chain too. And by investing in the industries that are producing lower carbon materials for our buildings, our roads, our electric vehicles, we can help support our clean energy transition. Fortunately, when it comes to decarbonizing the industrial sector of our economy, we're already making progress. And that's thanks in no small part to the investments that Congress made in the bipartisan infrastructure law and in the Inflation Reduction Act. Measures that were written in no small part right here in this room. For example, our bipartisan infrastructure law established the new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations at the Department of Energy, which included the new Industrial Demonstrations Program. And last Congress, the Congress provided $6.3 billion in funding to this program to help deploy technologies to reduce industrial emissions. Bipartisan infrastructure law also included $8 billion for the development of regional clean hydrogen hubs throughout our country. I was especially pleased that the Department of Energy awarded funding to the Mid-Atlantic Clean Hydrogen Hub projects, which include parts of Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Our hub was one of 7 clean hydrogen hubs, including the Appalachian Hydrogen Hub, which is included in states of West Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. These clean hydrogen hubs will provide a reliable supply of clean hydrogen for transportation, for industrial processes, and power generations across our nation. And they will create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs in our regions. Let me repeat that. And they will create tens of thousands of good-paying jobs in our regions across the country. As the largest purchaser of materials in the world, the federal government also has a great opportunity to foster demand for low-embodied carbon materials through federal procurement. We can, and we are. In our committee's title of the Inflation Reduction Act, we provided over $5 billion for the Federal Highway Administration and GSA, General Services Administration, to buy materials such as concrete and steel for buildings, for roads, for bridges made with low carbon emissions. We can also include funding for the EPA to help us better understand the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of various construction materials and products. Supporting America's ingenuity and innovation and innovators is key to creating cleaner goods here at home, and we will hear about that today from our witnesses. In closing, the United States can continue to manufacture steel, continue to manufacture aluminum, concrete, and other materials while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And by doing so, we can make American industries more competitive on the global stage while addressing climate pollution and creating a lot of good-paying jobs. To do this, we need collaboration across sectors and stakeholders. Industry leaders, innovative startups, government agencies, environmental organizations, and academia must all work together. And so must we. And I think we do that pretty well here. My hope is that today's hearing will help us further our committee's understanding of some of the challenges and opportunities associated with decarbonizing heavy industry. And we look forward to hearing from our panel of knowledgeable witnesses and to having a productive and spirited discussion today. Before we do that, I want to recognize our ranking member, Senator Capito, for her good work on this front, and I'm happy to work with her and her team. Senator Capito, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize in advance. I have something going on that is causing my voice to disappear, a senator's voice disappearing. It's a dangerous thing. Anyway, Senator Carper, thank you for holding this hearing today to examine innovative bipartisan solutions to manage industrial greenhouse gas emissions. We've achieved the greatest success, I think, as a committee, including on climate, which we have worked on in a bipartisan way. The committee's surface transportation and water infrastructure legislation served as the backbone of the IIJA. The surface transportation portion of the IIJA included a first-of-a-kind subtitle devoted to climate change, featuring 2 new formula programs, one centered on carbon reduction and on resiliency. The IIJA served as a vehicle for many provisions from other committees to address emission, including industrial emissions. Chairman Carper and I managed that legislation across the floor, and so we negotiated many of these positions as well. Particularly important to me, and the chairman mentioned this in his statement, the legislation included the Regional Hydrogen Hub program administered by the DOE. As he mentioned, one of the 7 hubs the DOE recently selected is the Appalachian Regional Clean Hydrogen Hub, known as ARCH-2. This hub includes the states of West Virginia, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. ARCH-2 will produce both green hydrogen, which is hydrogen produced through the electrolysis of water, but also blue hydrogen, which is hydrogen produced from abundant Appalachian natural gas with carbon capture and storage technologies to reduce emissions. When up and running, ARCH-2 will supply hydrogen to a broad mix of hard-to-decarbonize industries, from energy to transportation to chemical manufacturing to steel production. It's no secret that carbon capture, which will be a critical component of the ARCH-2 hub, remains capital intensive and is yet to be commercially viable deployment. Chairman Carper, I really appreciate your years-long partnership with me in supporting carbon capture as a technology. This is why I've been a long supporter of 45Q to advance this technology that will be essential in preventing emissions and through direct air capture to reduce atmospheric conditions of carbon dioxide. ARCH-2 and all other future CCUS developments stand to benefit not only from 45Q, but also from prior legislation out of this committee, such as the Use It Act, which Chairman Carper and Senators Barrasso and Whitehouse and I led. Signed into law in 2020, the Use It Act, when implemented as intended, would ensure all carbon capture projects at all types of facilities can be permitted in a timely fashion. I said when implemented as intended because some of the administration's recent actions suggest they are not dutifully looking to expedite the permitting of these types of projects. For instance, for broad deployment of CCUS to become feasible, the EPA must approve Class 6 injection well applications to securely store the carbon underground. I believe your state is one of only two that have been able to do this on a state basis. In the IIJA, I supported the inclusion of $50 million for states to obtain primacy of this program, as well as $25 million for the EPA to process those permits at the federal level. The EPA needs the help because it has historically only approved 2 of these permits, and it took an average of 6 years to do this. The IIJA was signed into law 2 years ago today, November 15th, 2023, and only last week did the EPA finally announce the money for states to apply for primacy. In addition to delaying the application process for funding, the administration has now loaded up the primacy application project with new guidance and directions to address environmental justice that seems designed to slow projects down or suggest they are not safe. Meanwhile, the EPA has not permitted any of the 169 well applications that are now pending. Instead of focusing on expediting permitting and environmental reviews, the President's Council on Environmental Quality has focused on changing the rules of the road for the NEPA process. The administration's recent proposal, instead of simplifying the environmental review and permitting process, as Congress directed in the recent debt limit legislation, would add hurdles to these processes and expand the scope of reviews, opening projects up to increased delays and legal challenges. I do not want to suggest hydrogen and CCUS are our only tools for reducing industrial emissions, but I think we need to take wind of the regulatory headwinds that we are facing. I support other bipartisan solutions to reducing industrial emissions, such as utilizing advanced nuclear for industrial purposes. My bipartisan bill with the chairman, the ADVANCE Act, includes a number of important policies to deploy advanced nuclear to do just that. No matter how good the bipartisan solutions this committee and others enact to address climate change are, our efforts will never be realized if the projects they support are never built due to permitting challenges or a slew of new EPA regulations. Regulations such as the forthcoming Particulate Matter 2.5 National Ambient Air, NAAQS, I'll call it NAAQS because that's what it is, that the administration is rumored to plan, finalizing at a level that will plunge much of the country into non-attainment, requiring stricter permitting or offsets for new infrastructure or industrial facilities. Regulations such as the Clean Power Plan 2.0 that would undermine reliability and drive up the cost of power for manufacturing with its unachievable short-term targets. Antiquated regulations like the New Source Review will stymie upgrades at existing power plants and manufacturing facilities. So the list goes on and on. I urge my colleagues to continue to work with me on permitting reform and updating outdated environmental regulations, areas within our committee's jurisdiction, so we can assure that emissions-reducing technologies can actually get out of the market and make a difference. Thank you to all of the witnesses who are here today, and I look forward to our discussion and learning more about your efforts to reduce carbon emissions.
All right. Senator Capito, thank you. I thought you sounded great. If Kevin and I end up coming down with this tomorrow, we'll know where I came from.
I don't want to ruin anybody's holiday.
Hopefully we won't. Hopefully you'll be better really soon. As you know, we also are in a number of different committees. In some cases, the Ghost Committee's meeting right now. One of them that I serve on is going to have a markup, but they need me to be there to vote in a little bit, I'll slip out and go vote. And I have to go out to a place called the Swamp for a few minutes before that for a quick presser. So, but in the meantime, I appreciate Senator Capito keeping the trains on schedule. And I've had a chance to read your testimonies, and I'll have a chance to hear hopefully most of it before you finish. But now we're going to turn to our esteemed panel of witnesses, and we're grateful to two of you joining us today in person. I understand one of our witnesses is also under the weather, maybe with COVID or something, but I hope she'll be feeling better soon. But first today, we're going to hear from Dr. Abigail Regitsky. That's correct, isn't it? Regitsky? Dr. Regitsky? No? All right. Can someone check on that? Okay. All right. We can't hear her, though. There she is. Well, all right. Say something for us. Go ahead. Say, like, good morning.
Good morning,
Oh, that's
Senator.
great.
That is correct. So
All
thank
right.
you.
Lovely to see you. Thank you. I understand you are the senior manager on the U.S. Policy and Advocacy Team at Breakthrough Energy, a network of investment funds, nonprofits, and philanthropic programs and policy efforts working together to scale the technologies that are needed to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And in this role, Dr. Regitsky is responsible for implementing Breakthrough Energy's climate policy priorities with a focus on industrial decarbonization and innovation. She earned her PhD in material sciences and engineering from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and brings a wealth of knowledge on industrial decarbonization efforts. Our oldest son is a graduate of MIT. I could barely spell MIT when I was at Ohio State, but but fortunately, we have sons that are a lot smarter than me. Our second witness is Dr. Leah. Did you go by Leah? Leah, okay, not Leah, Leah. Dr. Leah Ellis, CEO and co-founder of Sublime Systems, Inc., a Massachusetts-based company beginning to commercialize a breakthrough low-carbon cement manufacturing process. Dr. Ellis earned her PhD from, how do you pronounce the university in Canada you went to, Dalhousie? Dalhousie, okay, I hope I didn't butcher it too bad. And she started Sublime Systems with a colleague at MIT during her tenure as a postdoc fellow there. To date, Sublime Systems has begun to scale their technology that eliminates the need for fossil fuels in cement production. We'll be interested in hearing more of that. And third, we're going to hear from Ms. Shannon Angeli. Angelski, oh, good. We need witnesses with easy names, too. No, that's okay. Angelski, president of the Clean Hydrogen Future Coalition. So when my wife asked me, what did you do today? I say, I met with the president. And she'll say, she'll be impressed. But president of the Clean Hydrogen Futures Coalition, a diverse group of stakeholders to promote clean hydrogen as a critical pathway for decarbonization. Ms. Angelski has spent her career developing and advocating for clean energy and carbon management policies with a particular focus on hydrogen as well as carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. And we thank you again for appearing before a committee today. We'll now begin our witness testimony. We'll lead off with Dr. Regitsky, and please proceed with your statement when you're ready. Thank you.
Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm honored to represent Breakthrough Energy, a network founded by Bill Gates to scale the technologies we need to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Following 8 years of work, we just published our first State of the Transition report to share the progress being made and the challenges that remain ahead. Innovation is at the heart of Breakthrough Energy's mission, and more than any other sector, industry cannot decarbonize without innovation. The industrial sector is responsible for transforming raw materials into the products of our daily lives, like the cement in our buildings and bridges and the steel in our cars and appliances. It's been the engine of American economic development. It also accounts for nearly a fourth of US greenhouse gas emissions and about a third of global emissions. While sectors like power and transport are expected to continue reducing emissions, industrial emissions are expected to stay flat and could even increase, likely making it the top source of US emissions in the future. In part, this slow progress comes from industry's reputation of being hard to abate. This is largely because the main sources of emissions are essential to how industrial goods are manufactured today, namely emissions from industrial heat and process emissions from chemical reactions. For example, steelmaking requires temperatures over 2,000 degrees Celsius, and the raw material for cement contains CO2 that's released when it's made. The good news is that many US companies are actively working on breakthrough technologies to address these emissions, as well as reduce and eliminate air, land, and water pollutants. This will bring tangible health and quality of life benefits for the workers in industrial factories and the fence line communities surrounding them. Several solutions are cross-cutting and can be applied in many sectors. These include energy and material efficiency, electrification, the use of hydrogen and other low carbon fuels and feedstocks, and carbon management. One promising example is thermal energy storage, which stores renewable energy as heat and then delivers this heat for use in industry. For every cross-cutting area, building enabling infrastructure, like more transmission, will be critical, as is robust community engagement on the risks and benefits of each technology. In addition to cross-cutting technologies, each sector can benefit from tailored solutions. For example, one company is developing a fully electric process that reduces iron ore and makes steel in one step. While promising, many of these technologies are relatively immature, and for those close to market readiness, barriers still remain, such as high capital costs, long factory lifetimes, low profit margins, and competition from other countries. Smart policies that address the entire innovation cycle, from R&D to deployment, will be critical to accelerating their path to market. Policies must support the supply of clean industrial technologies through investments in RD&D and financial incentives. Congress recognized this in passing the Clean Industrial Technology Act, introduced by Senator Whitehouse and Ranking Member Capito as part of the Energy Act of 2020. Then, through the Infrastructure Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act, Congress provided a historic $6.3 billion for industrial demonstration projects. Industry applied for nearly 10 times the program's budget, indicating the need for future funding. Complementary public procurement or buy clean policies can create sizable markets for low emissions goods. The IRA included over $5 billion for federal procurement of low carbon construction materials. It's critical that these programs target materials with the lowest possible embodied emissions available today. Furthermore, new policies will be needed to provide long-term offtake, such as through advanced market commitments or contracts for difference, which will unlock further investments. To maximize these domestic investments, climate-aligned trade policies must address potential emissions leakage. As a first step, policies must build the data infrastructure to reliably measure and report embodied carbon, which underpins the effective design of all the above policies. Fortunately, Congress is increasingly paying bipartisan attention to these issues. For example, Senators Coons, Kramer, and several members of this committee introduced the Prove It Act. On average, US industry already boasts lower emissions intensity production internationally, and decarbonization investments will only strengthen this carbon advantage and increase global market share. Senators are also developing trade policies to address carbon leakage and competitiveness. This includes Senator Whitehouse's Clean Competition Act and Senators Cassidy's and Graham's Foreign Pollution Fee Act. Breakthrough Energy supports bipartisan discussions to develop trade policy that bolsters the competitiveness of domestic industries and puts a spotlight on manufacturing emissions abroad to incentivize industrial decarbonization around the world. Addressing industrial emissions will also safeguard manufacturing's role as a critical piece of the US economy. This year, the manufacturing sector employed 13 million Americans, and for every one manufacturing worker, 4.4 workers are added to the economy overall. Thus, investing in this sector will pay dividends in economic growth and revitalize communities that have suffered decades of progressive deindustrialization. In summary, without intervention, the industrial sector is set to become the highest emitting US sector in the next decade. Addressing industrial emissions depends on a full spectrum approach of supply-side investments, demand-side market creation, trade policies, and data infrastructure. Decarbonizing industry not only aids net zero goals, but enhances American competitiveness, retains and creates manufacturing jobs, and benefits worker and community health. The world is on the brink of a clean industrial revolution, and America is poised to take the lead. I urge the members of this committee and Congress to not let this opportunity pass us by.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we'll hear from Dr. Ellis.
Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee, thank you for hosting me today to discuss the important role the federal government plays in accelerating low-carbon building materials. I'm the CEO of Sublime Systems, a company commercializing low-carbon cement, and I'm here to talk to you about the extraordinary opportunities enabled by industrial decarbonization. These include fostering innovation, attracting talent, creating jobs, boosting domestic manufacturing, and fighting global climate change. This is a win-win that energizes myself and my colleagues, and as well as my peers in many adjacent industries. Today, cement manufacturing is responsible for 8% of global CO2 emissions. If the industry were a country, it would be the third largest emitter after China and the US. Today, cement is made in massive fossil-fueled kilns running at temperatures up to 1,400 degrees Celsius to cook limestone, which releases CO2 as it decomposes in the kiln. I started Sublime Systems with the mission of having a swift and massive impact in reducing these emissions. At Sublime, we use electrochemistry instead of heat to turn non-carbonate minerals into cement. Our process runs at room temperature and entirely on electricity. This avoids both the limestone and the fossil fuel emissions that I mentioned before. Our cement is fully compliant with industry-accepted performance-based standards, and we can produce over 100 tons of cement per year in our pilot facility, which we are scaling quickly. The public sector has a unique ability to accelerate cement's decarbonization. Collectively, it deploys 60% of all the cement used in America through the building of public infrastructure. You have admirably responded to this challenge in several ways, many of which we can't fit into my allotted 5 minutes, but I'll highlight a few. Sublime has received Department of Energy ARPA-E funding, which enabled us to de-risk our technology as it spun out of the university, which allowed us to attract venture capital investment. Secondly, both the General Service Administration and the Federal Highway Administration have recently allotted billions to the use of low-carbon construction materials. Sublime has already noticed increasing customer interest in response to these policies, and we urge Congress to consider making such initiatives permanent. We've collaborated with other low-carbon cement developers to encourage further policy adoption. The Decarbonized Cement and Concrete Alliance is focused on procurement policy, demand support measures, and early adopter platforms, as well as another critical lever, production tax credits. The existing 45Q tax credit rewards technologies that capture carbon, but it does not reward technologies such as ours that avoid CO2 emissions in the first place. We encourage technology-agnostic implementation of tax credits to create a level playing field for all industrial technologies that avoid CO2 emissions and address climate change. I would like to acknowledge the DOE's Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, OCED, as a vital initiative for helping technologies to create products at scale and unleash the transformational job opportunities in the process. Sublime is currently engaged with OCED for potential funding of our first commercial facility, and we're confident in our prospects. However, if we are ultimately not selected, we believe this will primarily reflect how many quality innovations are seeking this money. I urge Congress to make this program permanent as it generously fund it until the American economy is decarbonized. Decarbonizing industry offers an opportunity to spur an American manufacturing revival, especially in communities that have been left behind. We've used the Justice 40 screening tool and policy tools to identify the location of our first commercial plant, a Western Massachusetts site in a disadvantaged community census tract. This city formerly housed a booming paper industry. We're already collaborating with city officials, community organizers, nonprofits, and unions to ensure that our plant delivers maximal benefits to residents. We've signed a strategic partnership focused on high-quality jobs with United Steelworkers, and we're exploring a collaboration with the Smithsonian Science Education Center. We expect to create 70 benefits-bearing jobs, and many of these roles will not require an advanced degree, making them accessible to those who have not gone to college. We know that the clean energy transition can be a just transition. It can also be a prosperous one, bringing an industrial boom the likes of which we have not seen in hundreds of years. The fact that you are hosting this hearing today is already quite impactful in highlighting the climate and economic opportunities within. I thank you for your work in this and for your time today, and we look forward to your continued partnership. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Angelski.
Thank you, Ranking Member Capito, and also to the chairman and members of the committee for the opportunity to discuss the role that clean hydrogen can play in industrial decarbonization. As the president of the Clean Hydrogen Future Coalition, I represent a diverse set of stakeholders that came together to promote clean hydrogen as a critical pathway to achieve global decarbonization objectives. Our foundational principle is to decarbonize the economy through technology neutral and resource agnostic, or as we call it, colorblind policy, that will enable clean hydrogen to be a scalable decarbonization solution. Obviously, we know that international climate authorities have identified clean hydrogen as a pathway for meeting global climate targets, and that's really because clean hydrogen is a game changer. It has the ability to accelerate decarbonization across all sectors, as well as transition existing and create new skilled high-paying jobs that underpin the clean energy transition. There is a thriving hydrogen market today that operates. It's mainly used in petroleum refining and ammonia production, which represents approximately 90% of total domestic hydrogen production and use. Other hydrogen applications are used in smaller quantities for synthetic fuels, chemicals and plastics, or other niche applications. However, we currently produce hydrogen almost totally from natural gas, and that's because we have low-cost, abundant supplies and that are supported by a vast network of infrastructure. As Senator Capito already pointed out, there are alternative methods to lower the carbon intensity of these hydrogen production methods. Electrolytic hydrogen using zero-emitting electricity, as well as reforming of fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage. So if the domestic refining industry were to convert their existing production methods to produce clean hydrogen, that process in and of itself would reduce industrial sector greenhouse gas emissions by 5.5%. And that's really not an insignificant number, particularly after what Leah has already said. And there are other industries that do not currently use hydrogen. It's already been mentioned, steel, concrete, and others. And so we have several ways to decarbonize those industries using clean hydrogen. I really want to thank Congress for the work that's already been done, both bipartisan and through the IRA. Many of these programs, Senator Capito already mentioned, and the witnesses, so I won't talk about the hydrogen hubs, which are critical at this point, as well as the Section 45V tax credits and the industrial decarbonization funding. But there's also been other legislation that's been introduced by Senators Coons and Cornyn I want to raise that would enable clean hydrogen to decarbonize the industrial sector and port operations. And in the last Congress, Representatives Tonko and McKinley introduced a bill that would establish a pilot program at DOE to enter into contracts for differences to offset what are the increased costs associated with the production or purchase of clean hydrogen in industrial applications. The coalition is also recommending that Congress consider funding a new program in the Farm Bill, and this would provide grants for the production and use of ammonia that's produced with clean hydrogen as a feedstock for domestic fertilizer production, and as a tool to lower, obviously, greenhouse gas emissions in the industrial sector. There are a couple of hydrogen hubs that are looking at that sector to provide their clean hydrogen to offset those fertilizer production methods. While groundbreaking and necessary investments made by Congress will serve as a significant down payment to expand the clean hydrogen economy, it is important to recognize that additional policies will be needed to achieve economies of scale and stimulate the use of clean hydrogen, particularly in those industries where hydrogen is not currently used as the incumbent fuel or feedstock. DOE suggests that securing long-term offtake agreements for clean hydrogen is one of the key near-term challenges, as well as the associated infrastructure build-out. But the long-term offtake agreements is really due to the significant cost gap between the cost of clean hydrogen and the incumbent fuels, which are much cheaper, as I've already mentioned, as well as the volumes of hydrogen that are needed to decarbonize these industrial processes. DOE has also indicated that in order to achieve their goal of 50 million tons of clean hydrogen per year by 2050, the entire clean hydrogen supply chain must scale rapidly. And that will only occur if new policy is adopted that incentivizes the private sector investments that are needed. There's a precedent for Congress to enact policy support to stimulate the creation of new markets when it deems it's necessary to do so, and clearly the existing domestic clean hydrogen market will need similar policy treatment, and we look forward to working with Congress to develop and design some of those new demand use policies that will enable capital creation. As the administration considers how to implement an indirect booking claim accounting system for implementing the 45E tax credit, The coalition wants to caution against adopting principles such as additionality or hourly time matching, as those measures would delay investment and make clean hydrogen unnecessarily costly. The coalition is pleased that Chairman Carper, along with Senator Cantwell and 10 of her Senate Democratic colleagues, submitted letters to the administration urging against adopting overly prescriptive regulations that would make the use of the 45V tax credits largely inaccessible and have the negative impact of little private sector investment, and really delay the ability of clean hydrogen to be an industrial decarbonization tool. So I just want to conclude my remarks by sharing in the significant benefits that have already been discussed through industrial decarbonization and that clean hydrogen can bring. It can bring a lot of benefits to communities across the country in jobs, as well as health impacts and reduction in environmental emissions. And creating a new clean hydrogen commodity market carries significant economic value and positions the U.S. to be a global leader in the export of hydrogen. Thank you again, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Thank all three of you. And we're going to go to Senator Markey first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Environmental justice cannot be an afterthought of industrial decarbonization. It must be front of mind. For far too long, fence-line and front-line communities have borne the brunt of industrial pollution, wreaking havoc on the health and economic wellness of Black, brown, and low-wealth individuals in our country, and creating environmental sacrifice zones in the name of economic growth for others. When it comes to industrial innovation, we need to be better than before, not continuing with business as usual, which created the climate crisis and environmental injustices. That's why industrial decarbonization that depends on green hydrogen needs guardrails and strong standards. Ms. Angeli, will you commit to advocating for the 3 guardrails of green hydrogen: additionality, deliverability, and hourly time matching to help us deliver the greenest hydrogen possible?
Thank you for the question and recognize the issues that you're raising, Senator. The coalition is proposing that we adopt more restrictive policies, as you are suggesting, these 3 guardrails of additionality, restrictive or hourly matching, and regional matching over time. And our recommendation is to begin to adopt more restrictive measures beginning in 2030, which is a similar approach to what the European Union has adopted. And the reason for that is we want to see significant investments in the supply chain that is necessary to support the scale of that industry and the growth of the industry in order for clean hydrogen to deliver in that decarbonization solution for industrial decarbonization.
Well, I would say that I'm just going to urge you.
Excuse me?
I'm just going to urge you to understand that we want your ambitions to be high for innovation, but we also want ambitions to be high to ensure that we are not perpetuating injustice and obscuring pollution, which is what these industries have done historically. So that's a long time frame, and that's why guardrails for hydrogen created with targeted new and renewable energy, as well as continuous inclusive community engagement, will be what spurs truly clean energy technologies. Dr. Ellis, thank you for joining us from Somerville, Massachusetts. You said in your testimony that sublime systems.
Thank you, Senator Markey. I agree. I believe that the energy transition can be a just transition. In the case of Sublime Systems, we've used the Justice 40 tool to look at where we might site our first commercial plant. And what struck me is that many of these disadvantaged communities are the site of old manufacturing towns. And in fact, what makes these towns, what makes them left behind and disadvantaged is the same reason why new manufacturing will come to these towns. These are places where permitting is already sited industrial, there's already access to railroads. In many cases, these sites already have access to hydroelectricity that has been built decades or even hundreds of years ago. So we believe that coming back to this city is right for us, but it's also right for the community. And we hope to bring not only jobs and training, but also to really integrate with the community and be a good neighbor to the people who are welcoming us into their community.
Thank you. And as you said, after China and the United States, cement is third in terms of emissions. It's responsible for 8% of all global carbon emissions. Even once new technologies get developed to try to tackle that problem, it can take 2 decades for the market to catch up. So how can the federal government further drive demand for low-carbon construction materials like cement?
Thank you, Senator Markey. The U.S. government buys 60% of the cement that's consumed in the United States.
Say that again. That's a crazy number.
It is, in fact, a crazy number. The U.S. government buys 60% of the cement in the United States, and that is a culmination of the GSA, the Federal Highway Administration, the Army, DOT, both at the state and federal level. So there, if there are no advanced market commitments, if there's no commitment to buy low carbon cement from the government, this makes my job as an innovator in this sector more than twice as difficult as it should be. So I believe the government has a responsibility to make these commitments, to create bankable contracts that will allow us to get project finance to build these plants. Moreover, that 8% of global CO2 emissions, it's not mostly in the United States, it's globally. And so these countries that are going to be building more because of growing and urbanizing populations, they're undergoing a period of dirty growth. And they're going to be building cement plants that are based on legacy fossil fuel technology unless we can move quickly to develop American-made electrochemical technology, and we can deploy this internationally and export our technology.
So the faster we innovate.
Exactly.
And that can be driven by robust federal procurement policies because the federal government consumes 60% of all cement, and then we can export that new technology that gets developed because the federal government had strong procurement policies around the rest of the world. So I thank you. I know my time is expired. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to all of our witnesses for being here. And I'm going to try not to jump around too terribly much, but so much has already been said that's intriguing to me. I want to start with you, Ms. Regitsky. Your testimony referred to the United States comparative carbon advantage, and I appreciate that terminology. It also points out appropriately that the United States imported more than 1.2 gigatons of embodied emissions, mostly from China. And I appreciate, Dr. Ellis, you're referencing this as a global issue, right? And we tend to look inward and sort of beat ourselves up a little bit, in my view, too much, rather than looking at the global. And by the way, I love the idea of being the innovators and then exporting the innovation. We sometimes forget that most of what we export is brain power and innovation as well as raw products. But that said, according to data that was compiled by the CLC, goods manufactured in the United States use 40% more carbon efficient, or are 40% more carbon efficient than the world's average, but the U.S. imports 75% of its goods from less carbon efficient countries. So again, getting back to this global issue, getting back to trade policy as much as anything, it's why I often say that so much of our energy and environmental policy is inward, it's punitive, rather than recognizing, again, the global nature of all of this. So I want to get to the Prove It Act, obviously, is where I'm leading, and I appreciated Ms. Regitsky bringing it up, because without good, solid data to demonstrate, the statistics I just used, I don't know that we can move forward as easily until we start proving that we really are more carbon efficient than the rest of the world. We've actually done a lot to bring down CO2 emissions in the United States. We really have been innovative, and rather than buying more steel from China, how about more steel from West Virginia or Indiana, or how about proving that a Bakken barrel of oil is cleaner than a Venezuelan barrel of oil? And in the cement sector especially, that's probably as obvious as it is anywhere. And I'm not saying we shouldn't always be striving to improve. It's not that. It's just that I think we beat ourselves up too much. So what's my point? My point is, I guess I'd just like maybe Ms. Regitsky, if you would talk a little bit more about the Prove It Act and what you think, what value that could bring to the discussion. And then I just might ask you, Dr. Ellis, and you, Ms. Angeli, on the same topic of data collection while we try to forward, lean into the production. Ms. Regitsky.
Thank you, Senator Kramer, for the question and for your bipartisan introduction of the Prove It Act. As you've mentioned already, and I've mentioned in my testimony, data is really the kind of first piece of the puzzle to start, as you said, proving that indeed much of US production is already more emissions efficient than other countries, especially countries that we are importing our goods from. And so what the data allows us to do is really have this transparent reporting of this emissions intensity and the competitive advantage, the carbon advantage of US production. The other thing it enables us to do is respond to when other countries are starting to think about their own policies. For example, the EU, as you probably know, is starting to implement their own carbon border adjustment mechanism. And by folks looking at existing carbon advantage of the US, such as CLC, they've noted that because of the US's carbon advantage, looking at the US imports into the EU versus, say, China's imports to the EU, which are going to be more carbon intensive, the US actually stands to gain market share in the EU market with the EU CBAM in place. And so having things like Prove It will enable us to make sure that when those types of policies that other countries put in place come into fruition, that we can really make sure that they are fair and they are accurately representing the low emissions intensity of the US market.
Yeah, very well said. Dr. Ellis, anything more?
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. So the Europe carbon and border adjustment rule is very important for protecting against dirty imports. I'll also say that in the EU and in America, there's proliferation of EPDs, environmental product declarations. That's a nutritional label for cement materials that lists not only the embodied carbon of that material, but also the embodied energy and many of the other pollutants that Senator Markey mentioned affect the local communities in which these materials are made.
And I can speak to respect to clean hydrogen. Right now, the life cycle analysis and accounting methodology is already built into federal policy to qualify for clean hydrogen, whether it's tax credits or DOE grant funding. So that accounting system for tracking the emissions associated with production and use is already built into federal policy that will catalyze this industry. And it's really important to recognize that if there are industries that want to use clean hydrogen and that will purchase it at a premium price, for example, the carbon intensity value of that hydrogen is going to be the critical aspect of that, because there are industries that are going to want to be able to say, look, I'm using decarbonized hydrogen and it's reducing my product emissions by X amount, right? So, and that's the selling point and the value add, I'll just say, for clean hydrogen.
It looks to me like Prove It Act's sort of the low-hanging fruit in this group. But with that, Ms. Angeli, if I stick around long enough, I'm going to want to ask you, of course, about the Heartland Hydrogen Hub. But thank you for your work on that. Thank you, Ms.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you. Let me thank Senator Kramer for his interest in carbon border work, and I look forward to making more progress in that area. Dr. Regitsky, we have a number of things on the horizon. The first is the European Union's CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which will begin counting carbon emissions shortly and begin tariffing carbon emissions in 2026. The United Kingdom, it has just been reported, will be joining the EU on a similar schedule with a similar carbon border tariff to neutralize any tariff obligations between the UK and the European Union. What effect will that have on decarbonizing America's industrial sector?
I thought I was meeting somebody at 11. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Whitehouse, for the question, and would love to build on my response to Senator Kramer's question as well. That yes, these new CBAM policies that the EU and the UK are planning to put in place are already in motion. will certainly have an impact globally and U.S. manufacturing as well. As we've already been discussing, U.S. manufacturers are often already much more carbon efficient, energy efficient than manufacturers in other countries. And so they stand to gain actually from being able to access more of these European and UK markets because they have a carbon advantage to some of the other countries that are importing into those places. And if we couple that with further investments in decarbonization in our domestic industry, then that carbon advantage is just going to keep growing and growing and creating, even more opportunity to take that global market share. And as other countries beyond the European continent are thinking about border adjustments as well, then that just furthers the opportunity even more.
The economic experts who advised the EU in the CBAM note that there will be some economic headwinds for America by virtue of having to pay a carbon tariff to the EU because we are not as because we are more carbon intensive than the EU, but that headwind will be more than offset by a massive tailwind as manufacturing now taking place in China and supply chains now beginning in China move to the United States, because the relative difference between the tariff that China would have to pay and the tariff that the US would have to pay would actually be a huge economic value. If we were to step up our own participation in the EU and now potentially UK CBAM, we could reduce the tariff headwind while also enjoying the tailwind. Is that not correct?
Yes, that's exactly right, Senator.
And then one other thing that I'd mention that is coming at us is the administration's decision, the Office of Management and Budget's decision, which I very strongly applaud, to take the social cost of carbon that is shortly to emerge from the Environmental Protection Agency's APA rulemaking process and make sure that it's applied across the board. So we've heard testimony about buying cement. Into that cement calculation would now have to fit $190 per ton social cost of carbon. I expect, Dr. Regitsky, that you also see that as a positive influence on industrial decarbonization in America.
Certainly having some kind of mechanism to differentiate the emissions intensity of the products that the federal government is buying will be able to advantage those who are producing the more efficient product, as well as create those markets for innovators like Sublime and others to really see the potential of the market for, the investments that they're making into their net zero technologies. And so it'll certainly be able to increase the amount of innovation in really being able to get to net zero in industry.
And it's a fairly elementary proposition of market economics that polluters should pay the cost of their pollution rather than socialize the cost of their pollution onto other innocent parties. Without that, the whole principle of market economics, which is the principle of price signals, is warped and degraded and doesn't work any longer. So do you believe it's consistent with traditional economic policies to have the social cost of carbon and the CBAM and other tariffs reflect the fact that there are harms from carbon emissions?
I'll say that I'm certainly not an economist, but my understanding is generally being able to price in these negative externalities where the costs are being brought on to somewhere in society and putting those in the places that are causing the actual harm and the costs does align with the idea of negative externalities in economics.
Well, you may not be an economist, but you know what negative externalities are. That's a pretty good first step. I'll take it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Angeli, I wanted to ask, in my opening statement, I talked about ARCH2, the hydrogen hub, and how excited we are to have that coming to our region, particularly in my state. But each hub has selected different mixes of pathways for producing, and I think that was written into the bill. And so when it comes to build out of our nation's hydrogen infrastructure, where do you think the initial demand will come from, and what will the associated emission benefits be?
Of course, thank you, Senator Capito, and I'm familiar with the hub, and it's West Virginia, the ARCH2 hub. The important attribute, I would say, about the hydrogen hubs generally is that they will enhance that sort of network effect that's needed by aggregating both the production, the transport, and end-use demand, and enable that infrastructure to be shared and be lower cost, at least initially, as the industry grows. One significant benefit of what the ARCH2 hub is looking at is that they have a variety of end-use sectors that exist within the hub that can take advantage of it. So you have, if you think about the existing markets, those are probably the lowest hanging fruit in terms of emissions reductions and targets where those can, where hydrogen can be adopted in those sectors. And that's because they already need hydrogen and use hydrogen. But the other sectors, as in the industrial, so for plastics, chemicals, whether we're talking about transportation fuels outside of the industrial sector or even in other industrial end uses like cement or concrete, that's where hydrogen can grow and expand. But to do that, we'll need some additional policy and price support likely. But that's, the industrial sector is the third largest emitting sector. So the sooner we actually use hydrogen in those sectors, the sooner we'll see those emissions benefits.
Yeah. Let me talk a bit, I mentioned permitting and how there have been some bureaucratic headwinds to getting these projects approved. How concerned are you about the permitting process that we're seeing on the Class 6 wells? And then there's the issue of permitting the transport of hydrogen as well. So could you speak a little bit to the permitting?
As it relates to the Class 6 permits, I mean, you mentioned it in your opening remarks, right? I think there are almost 60 applications pending before EPA. One has a provisional permit out of the 60. And many of these applications were filed years ago. So you all obviously provided funding to EPA and the regional offices to really try to help expedite the processing of applications. And the hope is that once EPA is able to staff up, get the expertise, I think there's also a lack of expertise at the moment to provide that resource and to serve the resource needs throughout the country. Hopefully, those funds will catalyze that and really help to accelerate processing of those applications. But it is a concern because obviously the longer, as you know, permitting takes, that's the time value of money for project developers. And the same is true when we're talking about any infrastructure component of a project, including pipelines, as you mentioned. I think that probably the biggest concern is with respect to siting of pipelines and the time it takes to site, and that's a permitting issue. It's also a local landowner and other regional or community set of issues. And I think appropriate engagement in the communities, but then also streamline siting authority among the federal agencies in particular would be really critical to go a long way in accelerating or processing those more quickly.
Dr. Ellis, you mentioned that you're going to site your first manufacturing facility in Massachusetts. How far along are you on that project? Have you gotten into the permitting parts of that yet?
Yes, we've already gotten into permitting. We were lucky to find a plot of land that was already zoned industrial, and
So was it a brownfield?
It was a brownfield
Yeah, that's a
site.
big
However,
advantage.
I would share your concern about permitting timelines. It is something where you can be a startup and you can deploy all these resources, but at a certain point you have to hurry up and wait if you're being held back by permitting. And I think especially with the enhanced scrutiny that comes with taking government funding from the IPA, for example, from the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration, if we were to win that funding, we would be subject to NEPA, and that could very much create a situation in which we hurry up and then wait.
So your permits now are just through Massachusetts, your state permitting?
That's right.
Yeah, generally they go faster. All right, thank you. And Senator Merkley is going to question, but Senator Whitehouse, I believe you're going to take the gavel from me.
I will gladly do so.
Pass it along.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Regitsky, I unfortunately was at a foreign policy gathering, so I missed some of your presentation. But as I understand it, Breakthrough Energy is a network. Bill Gates helped set it up, trying to find the innovative technologies that are necessary to bring to scale to meet the goal of net zero in 2050. Is that a fair summary?
Thank you, Senator. Yes, that's a very good summary.
And so in this process, building materials are obviously a key piece of this challenge. And could you comment a little bit about the role of mass timber as a substitute for buildings that are say 1 to 14 stories high, and the comparison to traditional concrete and steel buildings?
Sure, thank you for that question. I'll start by saying I'm not a structural engineering architectural expert or anything like that, and I've really focused on how do you reduce emissions from heavy industrial producers. That said, I think it's widely recognized that using alternative materials such as mass timber could be one of the solutions to be able to help decrease some of the current usage of things like concrete and steel in places in buildings, in structures where it makes sense. But I believe it's also true that mass timber builders still use some amount of those traditional materials as well. And with the development that we expect globally, we still anticipate needing quite a bit of those traditional materials in order to really be able to develop these structures. But yes, mass timber can certainly play a role in the buildings where it makes sense and where it can perform.
And where it can, and there may well be much taller buildings that are part of our world that require concrete and steel, both which consume a lot of energy. I was intrigued when I first came into the Senate by a company that presented me with a paperweight, which was essentially cement made in a different strategy in order to capture carbon. And essentially, hey, when this is put into a building, you've locked up carbon forever. But the downside was that the energy required to produce it and the massive amount of water required to produce it meant that if you were looking at the kind of the whole life cycle of it, it didn't really, wasn't a solution. There's very few places you could use that tremendous amount of water, and of course the energy required to make it meant you were producing carbon into the air to begin with. But we have, in terms of the investments that Breakthrough Energy is making, do you see a pathway where there are significant opportunities to greatly reduce the amount of energy that goes into concrete and steel buildings?
Yes, I think there are multiple companies within the Breakthrough Energy investment portfolio that are trying to solve this exact problem. So for one example, there's a company called Brimstone. They're actually looking to be a drop-in replacement for current cement production today. So no need to change in standards or the way that construction currently occurs, but the process that they use can entirely eliminate the emissions from the cement manufacturing. It's an entirely different process than the way cement's manufactured today. And they also create a byproduct that will capture carbon as well. And so if everything, depending on kind of the types of energy they end up using in their process, which they are compatible with clean electricity, they could come up with a potentially carbon negative cement alternative that's a drop-in replacement. There's many other companies as well that are finding new materials that substitute for cement as a binder. So you can use less cement in concrete, since cement is the most carbon intensive part of concrete. So there's many strategies out there today within the investment portfolio, as well as other companies such as Sublime.
No, I think that's really important, and I'm using that as a bit pivot to turn to you, Dr. Ellis, and your company, and I love the name Sublime, given that you have a process to convert limestone to cement that is consumes far less energy. I think it's at the heart of it. And have you, in your kind of analysis, really looked at kind of the whole cycle of the product so that you're including kind of apples to apples comparisons with other products in terms of transportation, use of whatever source of energy is engaged, and so forth?
Yes, that's right. We've recently done an environmental product declaration with the industry's leading provider of these life cycle analysis, both on the production of these materials. And I think what you say is very important, especially as it relates to mass timber. There's not only CO2 emissions in the production of these materials, we also have to look at the life cycle, the durability, and the end use of these materials to make sure that carbon is avoided throughout the life cycle, and also that energy consumption is reduced in the production of these materials. So, for example, today without Sublime's technology, the cement industry would have to decarbonize with post-combustion carbon capture, which would double the cost, double the electricity consumption of cement making. And as it relates to cement versus timber, mass timber is a great material. As the other witness said, it can be used in many applications, especially in low-lying buildings. But cement is unique in that it is very durable and strong. And I think a material like this will be needed more than ever, especially in a changing climate where robustness and durability is important. And the life cycle that you can get from a building made with cement is unparalleled.
Senator Ricketts.
Great, thank you very much. I want to also thank Chairman Carper and Ranking Member Capito for putting this hearing together, and our witnesses for sharing your perspectives with us here today. You know, we've talked a lot about carbon, and one of the things I think in these conversations often gets overlooked, though, is that when we're talking about emissions and so forth, is that actually carbon is valuable, and beyond just kind of the obvious that you need carbon dioxide in the air for plants to be able to grow. There's many uses for carbon that we need in our society. And in fact, what many people don't realize is that actually in Nebraska with our renewable fuels industry, specifically ethanol plants, we create some of the cleanest carbon in the industry. And it has many critical uses across our economy. So for example, in our meat processing industry in Nebraska, carbon is used to rapidly chill meat, to be able to use it in transportation, to transport it. Because we want to keep that food frozen as we're moving around the country. We also use it in water treatment. Carbon is used to be able to take out the removal of organic chemicals during the treatment process. And then, of course, in medical applications, carbon is used to sterilize medical supplies, the development of pharmaceuticals, and so forth. So, Ms. Angeli, how can we continue to promote innovative uses of carbon which add value to our supply chain?
I can speak at least to how carbon and hydrogen could be used together. I mean, if you look at the sustainable aviation fuels today, I mean, they need large amounts of carbon dioxide. If you capture that carbon dioxide, even better. And they need hydrogen. And so if you're to decarbonize the hydrogen, you could produce fuels that can really help to decarbonize industries like the aviation industry, right? So, or some of these other maritime sort of applications of what fossil fuels are used in today. So that's certainly one way to use it. There are a number of CO2 conversion pathways. Obviously, putting it into processes like concrete is another way that's already been discussed. But I think the innovation needs to continue, and clearly companies like Sublime and others that are trying to find innovative ways to decarbonize, but also funding provided by DOE to fund CO2 innovation and uses is really critical to continuing to find markets for the product.
Well, you mentioned hydrogen, so let's talk about that for just a moment. Nebraska has a long history of being an innovator when it comes to the agricultural industry. We have a company you may be familiar with, Monolith Materials, that has a patented process, a unique process, to be able to take natural gas and crack it into hydrogen and carbon black. Carbon black goes into things like mascara, your tires, cases for cell phones. And typically, it's a very dirty process to make it from petroleum, but this is a clean process. And of course, then we can have that carbon black to be able to make these other products we just talked about that we need in everyday life. But also, you get hydrogen out of that. And one of the uses for that is to be able to make clean anhydrous ammonia that then goes back into agriculture. We also have another company, Project Metallark, that is doing the same thing with regard to taking hydrogen and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about how hydrogen can make agriculture and other industries more efficient, cleaner, promote economic development? What are some of the other things we can do as we have some of these opportunities to be able to use hydrogen in conjunction with carbon?
So you obviously hit on thank you for the question, of course, and you hit on the key industry or sector that really, for a state like Nebraska, could really help contribute to decarbonization objectives for an industry in the agricultural sector that really doesn't have what I would say are very targeted solutions today that they have available to reduce their emissions from their processes. So even in the agricultural sector, you mentioned at least Monolith, and what they're looking at is to use decarbonized hydrogen as one of the feedstocks to produce ammonium fertilizer. And when you apply that, you could have agricultural products that are now decarbonized. You could also use hydrogen in many of the pieces of farm equipment that are needed to run and obviously farm the lands. And so that's obviously another area where that sector can really decarbonize from what they're currently using today, which is fossil fuels typically. Water irrigation systems need power. You can use hydrogen to power those. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for hydrogen to really help in the agricultural sector and decarbonize those emissions.
So have you seen some of these applications for hydrogen being used in some of the hydrogen hub projects that people are talking about?
There are at least 2 hydrogen hubs that are looking at fertilizer uses and using the decarbonized hydrogen that would be produced in that hub as the feedstock to produce ammonia and fertilizer. So yes, that's definitely, even I think Arch 2 is looking at that or if it's not Arch, it might be the Midwest one, I believe. So existing use cases are really for hydrogen are really what I consider to be the low-hanging fruit for adopting decarbonized hydrogen in those sectors. So it could really go a long way to helping create and stimulate the demand that clean hydrogen really needs to grow an industry in this country.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr.
Gavel
Chairman,
reverts to you.
thank you so much.
And Chairman Carper, like I promised, I did get a chance to mention our ethanol industry in Nebraska in this hearing.
I knew we could count on you. That's great. All right. Well, thanks so much. What a full morning. It's a good morning, And I hear this hearing's off to a good start. I asked people on both sides of the aisle, and very complimentary of the witnesses and really the tone that you're helping us to set. But I got a couple of questions, and I'll just jump right into my. Appreciate Senator Whitehouse filling in for me. Dr. Regitsky, in the fifth National Climate Assessment that was released yesterday, I mentioned it earlier when I was my opening statement, but some 14 federal agencies and hundreds of our nation's top scientists explained the urgency of cutting greenhouse gas emissions. We know that federal actions are key to unlocking swift and sharp emission reductions from industry. And that's why the EPW committee provided funding through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act to support near-term actions and transformative technologies to reduce emissions from heavy industry. And with that as a backdrop, let me ask this question of Dr. Regitsky. Would you please describe the ways in which the programs enacted under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act are supporting our efforts to decarbonize heavy industry? Dr. Regitsky.
Thank you, Senator, for the question.
You are welcome.
relayed in your opening statement and has been discussed by other witnesses as well. There are many programs within the Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act that are going to help industry progress on its way to industrial decarbonization. Just to name a few that I think are really important, and to just highlight a key piece that the two bills do together is really match supply support with demand support, which is really important. So on the supply side, as I mentioned in my testimony, over $6 billion at the Department of Energy to support industrial decarbonization demonstration projects. This is historical. Hasn't been this amount of funding to industrial decarbonization ever from the US government. And the fact that it's for commercial scale demonstrations, first of a kind facilities, is really critical, because that's really going to be able to support the transformative technologies that we really need to get to net zero, as well as the incremental emissions reductions that we need as well. And so this is a program that I'm personally very excited about. We're waiting now for DOE to make the selections, which I believe will come out early next year. But I already mentioned too that the industry appetite for this program has been immense. There were 10 times the amount of requests for funding than the $6.3 billion, which just shows how much is
Let me just say,
needed.
did that surprise you?
Maybe I was a little surprised, though maybe I shouldn't have been, because the investments that will be required to truly decarbonize all of heavy industry is going to be massive. And so $6 billion sounds like a lot, but it's really just a fraction. And so I think the 10 times initial need for this first program to come out just gives us a glimpse of what industry is really looking for. Then just to say, there are many other pieces that witnesses, members have already mentioned. The hydrogen hubs, of course, will be critical to using clean hydrogen to decarbonize industry. Also, very many tax incentives in the Inflation Reduction Act that will be relevant for industry. 48C, an investment tax credit for reducing industrial emissions in existing facilities. 45V for clean hydrogen, 45X that could be really game changing for thermal storage, which I mentioned in my testimony, to really unlock the ability of those thermal batteries to decarbonize industrial heat, and many more. And then just to quickly say on the demand side, it's really great that these investments were paired with the almost $5 billion to federal agencies for procuring low carbon materials. And so the government is helping companies invest to make their materials cleaner, and then creating the markets for those clean materials to really match that supply and demand, and show the industry that there's a buyer for the clean goods that they're going to be making.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much for that. I have a follow-up question, then I'm going to turn to Senator Padilla for his questions. But in part, you've already responded to this question. But I'm going to ask it again more directly and ask you to see if there's anything you want to add. But what role does public investment play in the technology development life cycle? And how can we as policymakers ensure that technology developers can continue to overcome the barriers to deployment?
Yes, happy to elaborate on that follow-up question. The government support all across the innovation cycle is going to be critical. So definitely in the early stages, where really this isn't where private capital comes in at all, where folks are still discovering their technologies in the lab and really kind of fine-tuning these technologies. But the government really has a place to step in throughout the development. So taking that lab technology to a pilot scale, to then a larger scale demonstration, to then financing for even further deployment. A big part of technology development is risk. And so where the government can come in is to really help de-risk these technologies and accelerate their ability to go through development and get to scale. And one quick thing to mention is just innovation is messy. It's a feedback loop. You make progress, you fail, you learn, and then you eventually succeed, and you can't really, skip any of those steps. And so what the government support helps to do is to de-risk at every one of those steps, make sure that learnings are be able to share between entrepreneurs, and so it just accelerates the process.
All right, well, great. Thanks for those, that response. And Senator Padilla, good to see you this morning. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and kudos to you for having multiple witnesses today with affiliation with the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Brilliant move, brilliant move. You can tell when there's 120 pages of testimony submitted that MIT folks are involved. California prides itself in having one of the lowest emitting cement factories in the country, located in Redding, California. We're also home to 4 startups in a network of 10 companies referred to as DC2 that are committed to going even further by making cement and concrete with no or very low emissions. However, as I've discussed at previous hearings, most current tax credits reward companies that first emit and then capture their emissions, but not as much for companies that are lowering or eliminating their emissions altogether. My first question is for Dr. Ellis. As a member of the DC2 Alliance, can you speak to your company's experience with the current tax incentives like Sections 45Q, which I think has been raised already, and 48C, and the agencies that developed and oversee them?
Thank you so much. This is a really important question. Right now, there is no tax credit available for technologies that avoid the manufacture of carbon. Sublime Systems submitted a concept paper for 48C, and we were discouraged from the full application. 45Q creates perverse incentives. Sublime System could manufacture carbon and monetize it by using limestone as an input material from our cement. But we believe that's wrong to do. That's not very forward-looking, and it's the wrong use of this tax credit. Instead, the Congress and the Treasury should consider technology-agnostic tax incentive to reward the avoidance of carbon as much as it does for carbon production, capture, and storage.
An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's my translation. Second question is for Dr. Regitsky. You were involved in the Sierra Club study of cement factories in California and other states. What lessons did you learn regarding innovations in decarbonizing cement and concrete at factory scale?
Thank you for the question, Senator. This was a really groundbreaking study that was conducted because of the facility level data that it provides. Of course, these are just estimates. These are actually very difficult numbers to get to have production data from facilities. But what these estimates start providing us is to really have a granular view of the performance of different facilities. So we can get an idea of what the average performance is, how well the top performing facilities are doing, and how well the bottom performing facilities are doing. And these are all existing facilities. So by looking at that difference, you can see what's already possible, even just using the best available technology today, and where those kind of near-term emissions reductions are possible. And so this study has really been able to showcase this in cement as well as a handful of other sectors. And it really showcases the usefulness of this type of data. And just to bring this back to a conversation we had earlier in the hearing, I mentioned this is difficult data to come by. The US government actually has all of the data to come up with these numbers in existing reporting. The census has these production numbers from these facilities, but of course it's kept very confidential for good reason. But the Prove It Act that we've discussed earlier would actually start enabling the sharing of this type of data between government agencies so that the government can start seeing what these emissions are, get the averages, and all of that as well.
Thank you. One more question, Mr. Chair, and this builds on an item that Senator Whitehouse raised earlier in the hearing. Looking ahead to COP28 this month, it's important to consider the global scale needed for industrial decarbonization as countries around the world increase their demand for concrete and other building materials. So for Dr. Ellis, Sublime has a goal of producing 1 million tons of concrete by 2028. Very laudable. But in the United States alone, our demand exceeds 100 million tons. So how can we help scale up low and no carbon emission concrete companies to the level needed to effectively supply the national and global market?
Thank you, Senator. The Office of Clean Energy demonstration combined with the Low Programs Office is an excellent first start. If we're successful in applying these two programs, it will support us through a phase of growth where we can achieve economies of scale and reduce costs so we can compete on cost with today's carbon-intensive Portland cement. These programs need robust support beyond these initial appropriations. Also, as Senator Markey said earlier, if we move quickly to create government advanced market commitments, since the government buys 60% of the concrete used in the United States, if we move quickly with these advanced market commitments to bring these clean technologies to scale, we can move to export these technologies to the rest of the world where new greenfield cement plants will be built in a period of dirty growth in India and in Africa and in places where the world's population is growing and becoming more urban. So we have an opportunity to act now to prevent decades more CO2 emissions from these carbon-intensive industries.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate your leadership. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Padilla. We've been joined by Senator Fetterman, my neighbor across the line in Pennsylvania.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Welcome. You're recognized.
Thank you, everybody. Hi. I'm sure you probably don't know this, and it's probably not very interesting of a fact, but I live right across the street from a steel mill. Literally, it's the last functional steel mill in all of Western Pennsylvania, which is a remarkable statement because that's where more than half the world's steel was actually manufactured there, back in the middle of the 20th century. And I've been in conversations with the leadership of U.S. Steel over years. And one of the things now that just became onto their screen about now, it's like we have to, or we have a mandate to decarbonize, our industry. And I was like, wow, that's remarkable. How can you possibly decarbonize steel? I mean, if anyone has seen a video of it or is familiar with it, it's like it's a very violent and kind of explosive kind of a process, and it's very, very dirty. And you can, I know that very well because you have to scrape it off the windows and things, at our home. And I asked the leadership, and I said, to me, decarbonizing the steel industry would be like having a steak house that you don't have a dead cow, kind of. How does that, it seems kind of incompatible there. So how is that possible? And then they started saying, well, hydrogen with that as well. And then I asked, it's like, well, where do we get the hydrogen from? And I said, because my understanding is that it comes from natural gas. And is that accurate? Is that accurate to anyone, any experts? Is that accurate?
I'm happy to answer that question, Senator Fetterman. But today, the majority of hydrogen that's produced comes from reforming of natural gas. You're correct. So, but you can lower the carbon emissions of that process by capturing and storing the CO2. So you could still use natural gas and decarbonize it and reform it so that way it can be used in the steelmaking process. So that is certainly one way to decarbonize the steel industry.
Yeah, and so, and of course, obviously you're experts, and again, of course, much smarter than I am. But I know that natural gas is a fossil fuel, and it does have carbon involved and everything. And of course, fracking is often very kind of controversial, certainly within the Democratic Party, and in Pennsylvania as well. So. And then I got to my next question. Part of that is like, well, if it's coming from natural gas and it's turned into hydrogen, or where it's made the way it's currently is under the most stringent kind of environmental requirements, is that really what's happening? Are we decarbonizing steel, or are we kind of greenwashing that? And then what does that mean to your average union worker that might be thinking, I'm going to lose my job because we're not able to meet some of these standards, and I lose my job? And politically, of course, those are the ones that are going to run to the Republican side, and the steel is going to go to the industries all across the world that make steel without any labor unions, without any kind of environmental kind of restraints or all these other kinds of things. So it's like, I would very much like to decarbonize steel, But, these are the kind of industries have a very, I think a very truth that you can't really make it without having carbon and environment unless there's some kind of super next kind of a paradigm shift. But how is that possible? And, what can be really meaningful having that conversation in industries like that are very part of the Western Pennsylvania legacy? Is there a path forward on that? And I open that up to anybody.
I'd be happy to start, Senator. And so I want to touch on your jobs component of this, because I think the unions and job market writ large, whether we're looking at just the fossil fuel industry or a clean energy industry, I think existing jobs are going to be the underpinning for the transition. If we're going to transition to these clean jobs, we will continue to need that union labor. And again, I would say the Congress and what they did in enacting the IIJA and of course the IRA, I mean, all of these requirements to make sure that we have apprenticeship programs to train and skill workers in these new industries will be critical for that. But we will need that labor. And as it relates to natural gas and the use of natural gas to produce hydrogen and or replace the fossil fuels that are used in the steelmaking process. I think as we drive towards a zero emissions hydrogen profile or emissions profile, I should say, I think we're going to need the natural gas industry with carbon capture and storage to really help build out the infrastructure that's going to be needed to get to that net zero emitting carbon intensity hydrogen production method, so that way it can be used in decarbonizing these industries, whether it's steel or other industries.
30 seconds, Mr. Chairman?
At least 35.
Thank you. But really, I mean, I guess the final question on is that perhaps you're aware of how controversial natural gas and fracking is now, but despite all of that and the realities that are part of that, and I do support the natural gas, is there really, are we being honest about decarbonizing an industry like that, or is it just kind of, just trying to, is it meaningful, I guess? Is it genuinely meaningful and all of that? And then is that dangerous? Because if we now decide, well, we're not going to even making these in America anymore, and now we are running right into the arms of foreign kind of steel manufacturers.
If I may take on this question, Senator, I think that is a very fair question. And just to say that there are other ways of making steel, and even primary steel, that's being developed now, that would altogether remove fossil fuels from the process, and still deliver that primary high quality steel that we need in several of the industries today, and that actually has the potential to grow the US domestic steel market share. BCG came out with a study that the global clean steel demand in 2050 is something like $1 trillion. And the US has the ability, if we make investments now in a variety of technologies, to be able to capitalize on that. And so things that use clean electricity, that bypass fossil fuels altogether. And just a comment on kind of the natural gas pathway, while natural gas and using carbon capture to create hydrogen is certainly one way to create a form of low emissions hydrogen that could go into steelmaking. The process that would use is a direct reduction process that actually in Toledo, Cleveland Cliffs has a direct reduction iron process with natural gas already. And the way that you would introduce hydrogen into the steelmaking practice is through the same type of process. And so if you're thinking about efficiency and energy efficiency, where the more efficient you can be, the fewer your costs, the more product you're making, the more revenue a company is generating. If you actually start with natural gas, then make hydrogen, and then put it into a DRI facility, you're adding an extra step rather than just going straight from hydrogen in the facility itself without that step. And so I think that's where the importance of things like the hydrogen hubs, trying to stimulate the supply of clean hydrogen from a variety of sources that, beyond just the natural gas derived hydrogen, but clean hydrogen from electricity as well, can really be what unlocks that ability for clean hydrogen to be used in the steel industry to provide truly clean primary steel.
Okay. Genuinely, I apologize. I'm sorry this has gone so far, Elaine, but thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, everyone, for answering all my questions.
Chairman, may I weigh in as well on Senator Fetterman's prompt?
Oh, okay.
Okay. I want to commend you, Senator Fetterman, on the on your point about
We'll
using
break for lunch in 40 minutes.
on
Not
using
re-
natural gas as a stopgap solution for decarbonizing steel. This is something that we think of as well. Sublime Systems has a true zero, not a net zero way of making cement. So we don't emit CO2 in the first place. And I think that's very important. And the witness from Breakthrough Energy mentioned that there are innovative technologies that are avoiding CO2 emissions in the first place, both for cement and steel. I also want to add that we have signed an agreement with the United Steelworkers Union for labor for our first commercial plant to make this true zero cement. United Steelworker Union employs 50% of the cement workers in the United States, and we believe it's very important for these workers to bring their skills. We bring this new innovation, this electrochemical manufacturing. They bring the knowledge, skill, expertise, and the safety skills to build this new plant. So I do think that together with our innovation and with the workers from these old manufacturing, we can bring American manufacturing into a clean energy future.
I sure hope that's true. I do, because the unions workers that I live next to and everything I talk to see that as like, well, then we're going to, might be the end of our career in making steel in the Mon Valley. But again, I've gone way, way, way too long. I apologize. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here. Thanks very much for your questions and for sparking a pretty darn good discussion. We may have another colleague or two join us. Again, probably maybe more than half the committees are meeting right now. So people are trying to be in several places at once. And I have a question I want to ask of Dr. Regitsky. And we don't mean to be picking on you, ma'am, but you're good to join us even remotely. But I'd like to talk a little bit with you about near-term technology solutions. Near-term technology solutions. Many of the transformative technologies that will enable deep decarbonization, such as entirely new ways to produce clean materials, will require time to reach commercial scale. I think we realize that. As the fifth National Climate Assessment makes all too clear, just released, but we don't have time to wait for these solutions to come to market as the climate crisis progresses. And while those new technologies develop, many tools are already available to make meaningful emissions reductions today. And that's good news. Dr. Regitsky, in your written testimony, you discussed various methods that can be deployed in facilities today to achieve meaningful emissions reductions. Would you just take a few minutes and share with us some specific examples of existing methods that can deliver immediate results? Dr. Regitsky.
Thank you for the question, Senator. There are definitely a host of available technologies today that can be used to start reducing emissions now. I'd say at the top of the list is energy efficiency. In any sector, that's always your go-to solution. Anytime you're able to become more energy efficient, you're saving costs. And so really it's a win-win. And with new technologies like smart manufacturing, where you can go in and add smart sensors to your different equipment, really monitor the performance of equipment and really optimize that energy usage, is really increasing the opportunity for energy efficiency even more. Then on electrification, especially of low temperature heating process. So for example, the food and beverage industry is one big user of low temperature heat. Rather than using natural gas to create that heat, electric heat pumps are a viable option today to be able to generate that low temperature heat and reduce a significant portion of those types of emissions across industrial sectors. Of course, electrification will also require infrastructure for that clean electricity and continued cleaning of the grid as well. And then as a final example, in the cement and concrete space. It's really great to see, the innovative technologies, the transformative technologies like Sublime is developing. But in the near term, there are things called supplementary cementitious materials, SEMs, that can be used to reduce the cement content within concrete. And so you're reducing the emissions of your concrete mix. And right now, a lot of these are sourced from current industrial wastes, fly ash from coal, slag from steel production. But we know that these things are not going to always be in supply as those industrial processes start decreasing. And so there are companies who are actually creating synthetic SEMs from widely abundant sources near already existing concrete infrastructure that can start supplying more of these materials to reduce that amount of cement per unit of concrete. And that's something that can be done today.
All right, good. Thanks. Thanks a lot. My next question, I'm going to direct it. I'm going to pick on Dr. Ellis, and this question deals with keys to adopting clean cement. We rely on a variety, you know better than us, but we rely on a variety of materials that must meet Ricketts standards in order to ensure safety and longevity. The steel that reinforces our buildings and the concrete that supports the transport of people and goods are designed to perform their functions under a variety of scenarios. National standards organizations play a role in setting performance standards for all kinds of materials, but local entities are often responsible for enforcing those standards, as in the case with building codes. And my question, Dr. Ellis, is how does the performance of cement made from new processes compare to the traditional cement production?
That is a fantastic question. Thank you. For many years, cement was defined by its chemistry, and not just the stoichiometry, the atoms and the elements present, but the crystal structure of the cement. Today's Portland cement is made in a large kiln, and that crystal structure can only be made in a kiln. So if we want to decarbonize cement, if we want to employ the supplementary cementitious materials that can be swiftly and massively deployed, in which the witness from Breakthrough Energy just mentioned, it means we have to change the definition of cement to be from a prescriptive-based standard, which specifies the crystal structure of the cement, to a performance-based standard. And the good news is that this change from prescriptive to performance-based standard happened decades ago. In 1992, ASTM International, the standards making body, created this performance-based standard. This is a standard that Sublime Cement applies to, and we meet and if not exceed, this performance-based standard. This means that our cement reacts with water, gels, sets, and hardens to make the same durable concrete that we've been using for decades and millennia. It's very important that the infrastructure that we're building, especially with public funds, is durable and safe.
Yeah, good, thanks. I think you partly answered this question, but I want to ask us, I'm going to ask it anyway and see if you'd like to add any other thoughts. But this is for Dr. Regitsky. Dr. Regitsky, would you comment on the need to update specifications and standards to help improve the marketability of clean projects? I'll just say that again. Would you comment on the need to update specifications and standards to help improve the marketability of clean products? Also, what are some other examples of clean materials other than cement that will require such updates? Dr. Regitsky.
Thanks for the question, Senator, and can certainly build off of Dr. Ellis's response previously that these performance-based standards exist today. The standards-making bodies have created them, and there are products that meet these standards. But the issue is that these standards and specifications need to be adopted by the people in charge of creating whatever the project is, infrastructure or buildings. So for example, state DOTs are one player that's really important in a regional market. If a state DOT adopts a specific specification, then most suppliers in that market will want to meet that specification in order to be able to access the state DOT infrastructure projects. We saw that this change happen with a type of blended cement called Portland limestone cement, PLC. It blends about 10% limestone into a cement mix, and so can reduce emissions marginally that way. And so now that's already accepted in majority of state DOTs today and has really impacted the adoption of this new cement blend. If we're able to do that same kind of state DOT adoption to just performance-based standards, as Dr. Ellis mentioned, that will be a game changer for innovative technologies that don't necessarily meet the strict definition of what cement is today, but can meet the performance requirements of these structures. And so being able to partner with organizations like state DOTs, with private sector and public sector buildings, projects, in order to make people comfortable with these types of performance specifications is going to be really critical.
All right, thanks. Thanks for that response. I want to turn, if I could, to talk a little bit about hydrogen and industrial decarbonization. And Ms. Angeli, how is the existing industrial infrastructure adapting to incorporate hydrogen technologies? I'll say that again. How is the existing industrial infrastructure adapting to incorporate hydrogen technologies? I understand that the industrial processes that are used in the production of things like steel, like cement, like glass, like chemicals, all require high temperature heat. Currently, this heat is produced by burning fossil fuels. And for these processes, hydrogen can play an important role in helping us reach net zero goals. But how easily can hydrogen be integrated into existing industrial processes without major modifications, and how is the existing industrial infrastructure adapting to incorporate hydrogen technologies?
So thank you for the question, Chairman. I would say that at least in the industrial or the existing industries that use hydrogen, they are looking at ways to produce low carbon hydrogen at a cost that would be equivalent to how they produce or use at the same cost of what is called gray hydrogen produced from natural gas today. And the industries that you mentioned that are potential users of hydrogen, they are waiting for hydrogen production costs to come down in price in order for them to begin to adopt using hydrogen in those processes. The important thing to understand is that the cost of hydrogen today is on average roughly about $1 per kilogram, and that's how it's measured. And that equates to about $7.50 per MMBTU of natural gas on an energy content basis. And so if you're looking at a price point of $1 as a replacement for natural gas as the incumbent fuel in many of these processes, the price of hydrogen will also need to go down in order for that natural gas to be substituted using hydrogen. Some industries and some steel making industries here in the US are looking at becoming like hydrogen ready is what they call it, to make sure that they have the ability to adopt hydrogen when the price comes down or there's sufficient volumes to be able to use hydrogen. Other industries are looking at utilizing, as I mentioned, existing infrastructure. So there are some producers in the Gulf Coast where there's a pretty thriving hydrogen industry already, and they are looking to produce hydrogen and try to do so in a way that would be able to be cost effective for their already existing industrial customers to be able to adopt the hydrogen in those industries. So everybody is moving towards or moving in a good direction, let's put it that way. We're waiting for the tax credit policies and the guidance coming from Treasury that will be really helpful in stimulating that activity and behavior.
In terms of bringing down the cost of hydrogen, what have we done in terms of policy, tax policy, whatever, the legislation that we've enacted? What have we done that is actually going to help with respect to bringing down the cost of hydrogen? And what more could public could government do or academia do? Or are there other ways that can help bring down the price of hydrogen?
Absolutely. And I know Abigail and others on as witnesses can speak to this as well. I'm happy to do that. But Senator, you led on the Section 45V tax credits, these production tax credits. They're going to go a long way in stimulating production of clean hydrogen. I think if there are policies that can be implemented to help offset that cost differential that I was just describing in terms of the replacement costs of using hydrogen in those sectors, that would go a long way towards stimulating the demand in those industries and help really drive adoption of decarbonized hydrogen in those processes.
Any other witnesses want to comment on that? How with respect to bringing down the cost of hydrogen? Anybody else?
I'm happy to add to that question, Senator. Certainly, I think the policies that the government has already been putting in place that Congress passed in the infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act, as Ms. Angeli already mentioned, will certainly help on that supply side and bringing the cost down. The Department of Energy certainly has this in its sights with its hydrogen Earthshot, and really bringing down the price of clean hydrogen to that $1 a kilogram figure. And so there are already, these policies in place. A big important thing is getting them implemented. So on the 45V tax credit, just making sure that guidance is out quickly. The lack of the guidance is really stalling kind of investor investing into new clean hydrogen projects and electrolyzers. And so that's going to be definitely a key piece of ensuring that the policy was meant to do what it's supposed to do, and is able to bring those costs down.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I'm going to ask a couple of open-ended questions here, and ask you to think about it. The last question, like in baseball, I like baseball a lot, but they have a saying in baseball about pitcher telegraphing his or her pitch, and it means the batter, or whoever's watching the pitcher, the way the pitcher holds the ball, releases the ball, and throwing it to the plate, the pitcher gives away what kind of pitch it's going to be: fastball, curveball, whatever. And the last question I'm going to ask him, we're going to turn to Senator Sullivan when he gets settled. But last question I'll ask will be asking y'all to just think about out loud about where you agree. I think there's sometimes we have witnesses that are like don't agree on almost anything, and I always try to look for a couple things where we can agree. I think there's a fair amount of agreement here amongst the three of you. So before we wrap it up, we'll come back and ask, where do you agree? And with that, Senator Sullivan, good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome aboard.
Thanks for waiting.
Sure.
Thank you to our witnesses. Appreciate you guys being here. I had a question. I show this chart a lot, and it's actually really relevant for today because President Biden is meeting with President Xi Jinping, and there's a lot of talk about emissions globally. That's since 2005 to 2020. This has been fact-checked and everything. But the emissions of China, we all know, are kind of through the roof, right? And nobody disputes that. Our emissions have actually declined pretty dramatically. And the reason is we had a dramatic revolution in the production of natural gas. So I think very few people argue with the reason why that went down. So my question for you, and that's good, Jake. My question for the witnesses is, to what extent do you think mandating, and very little of that was mandated, right? That was the private sector that innovated on the issue of hydraulic fracking and then kind of the extended reach drilling, which we do in Alaska, which shrinks the surface footprint, makes it much more environmentally sustainable. But to what degree do you think in the industrial sector the federal government should be mandating issues. There's an article that I'd like to submit for the record in the from the New York Times, Mr. Chairman. I don't normally submit articles from the New York Times. But Biden to target industrial pollution in his second term if he gets one. So a lot of this,
Without objection.
a lot of this article focuses on like mandates. Hey, you have to do this, and you have to do that, and you have to do this to industry. And one of the challenges on that, of course, is that sometimes you miss innovation. So again, nobody argues that we're actually the leader in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. China's the, dirty polluter. I hope the president brings that up in his meetings with Xi Jinping today. But that wouldn't have happened, in my view, which benefits everybody, let alone jobs and the environment, had there been a heavy-handed approach from the federal government saying, here's exactly how you need to do this. That revolution in the production of natural gas, nobody believed that could happen. The story is quite remarkable, but it really is essentially a lesson in the innovative capacity of the American private sector. So I'm curious for both the witnesses. This is kind of an open-ended question, but when you go for certain goals, if the feds come in and say X, Y, and Z has to happen, a lot of times you miss the opportunity for the innovation that could make things even better. So do either of you have an opinion on that?
I do, Senator Sullivan, and I'd like to thank you for sharing that graph. That graph actually made me very proud to be American and to see the leadership that we've taken in adopting new technologies quickly and having an impact. I believe that what I'm doing at Sublime Systems, developing a new technology to make cement that is true zero, not net zero, which means that we won't have to add additional cost, additional energy, additional labor into decarbonizing cement production. I think this is really important for us.
Are you doing that? Well, sorry to interrupt. It's a great point. But are you doing that because the feds or the Congress said do this, or are you just saying, hey, this could be great for my company, great for my community, great for my state, great for the country, help the environment? Yeah, we're a capitalist society, make some money, right? Nothing wrong with that. So why are you doing it?
Well, I'm doing it because I think it's important, and I think it's important to move quickly. I see it as a tremendous opportunity to develop new technology, and I think history has shown that the U.S. government has had a role in catalyzing the development of new technology, be it through NASA or the internet. And I know there's countless other really monumental technologies that have just had that partnership with the government to bring new ideas that are made in America and to export them globally. The U.S. produces 100 million tons of cement per year, but we also import about 20% of our cement from overseas. And pardon me?
From where?
From Turkey, from Greece, from Vietnam, from Canada, really from all over. And so I think this is a great opportunity to export made in America technology to India, to Africa, to China, to these places that have these incredibly polluting heavy industrial assets, because we know that climate change affects all of us in the US and elsewhere.
That's one reason I'm a big fan of exporting clean burning American LNG. It's the same analogy. Our other witness, thank you for that. And then I know we have a witness virtually, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to hear from that witness as well.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for the question. I would say that many of our members right now are already committed to innovative approaches to decarbonizing their operations, and many of them are industrial sector producers and users of their products. And so,
you worry about that article I just cited?
Well, I haven't had a chance to look at it, but I will. But what I can say is that absent mandates at the moment, these companies are committing and investing, and they're looking at other policy tools and levers. Of course, we were very much advocates of the clean hydrogen hubs and for the Section 45E tax credits. Part of my testimony has also called for action on helping to reduce the cost for adopting hydrogen as a replacement fuel in many of these industrial sectors. That is not a call for a mandate, but there will be a need for policy tools and levers to continue to both produce and use decarbonized hydrogen.
So more flexibility with the tools versus strict mandates. In Alaska, we always say, particularly with regard to the feds, the one-size-fits-all approach just does not work for our state, right? When D.C. is making rules, we're going to apply that to all of America. Inevitably, that doesn't work in my state. So flexibility on tools, but maybe not so strict mandates?
Sure.
Is that kind of what you're saying?
We haven't taken a position as a coalition on mandates because there hasn't been a discussion about industrial decarbonization and mandates for it. So, but I hold the fact that, you know, our members are already investing and looking towards a future that is decarbonizing and making those investments today. Partnering with the Department of Energy in innovative approaches to do that is going to be critical to making sure that we are successful.
Great. And then online witness, if you want to take a crack at that if you're still online.
Yes, Senator, thanks for the opportunity. Certainly, mandates are one type of policy that can reduce emissions, but certainly not the only one. What's important, which I think has already been discussed by the other witnesses, is that what we care about is emissions, and in industry, a lot of times emissions intensity. How many, emissions are being produced every time you make a ton of cement or a ton of steel, and so that's really the factor that we care about. And so policies that are smart, that can target that kind of data point, emissions intensity, but then allow industry to innovate and use whatever tools are necessary to meet that that target, is really what's going to help innovation the most. It'll help create this level playing field so that innovators who are aiming for the most emissions intensity savings, stand to benefit the most, because those are the technologies that we're going to really need to transform the heavy industry. And so thinking about smart policies that incentivize innovation is certainly helpful.
Great, good. Those are great answers, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. And I do think, to the witness's point, it's a great strategic advantage of America, particularly relative to China. And we can be doing that in a much less carbon-intensive way here, and then exporting, right, and beating them at their own game. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks so much for joining us for your questions. And it'd be interesting to hear what comes out of the meeting today between President Biden and President Xi. All ears. We're all ears. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. I mentioned, I've telegraphed my pitch earlier, and we're about to wrap it up here. But the areas of agreement. A lot of times, folks in Washington, even in the Senate, focus on disagreement. But in this committee, we actually focus a lot more on where do we agree, or how can we find common ground and build on that. But let me just start, if I could, with Dr. Ellis. Some major areas of agreement that you think you would like to just emphasize for us in closing?
Thank you. I think we can all agree that this problem, our solutions are urgently needed, and that they're very important, and that this is also a massive opportunity for us to work together and to really surmount this challenge, and to create more jobs in America, to reduce imports, to increase exports, and to bring high-quality jobs back to old manufacturing towns with new technology that's also clean and benefits the community more.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Angeli.
Thank you, Senator. I think what I would like to say is that the time is now, and especially as we think about clean hydrogen, this industry needs to grow, and it needs to grow very rapidly if it's going to be able to play the role that it needs to play as a decarbonization solution. And this is a very large, complex ecosystem. The industrial sector is a very large, complex ecosystem, and clean hydrogen is only one aspect of that, but it touches many industry and many sectors. And so for the solution to be able to be used and achieve decarbonization objectives, I think much of the policy that we have in place, thanks to you and others in Congress, that will be a great starting point, and we need to continue to work together in looking at policy for making sure that ecosystem can grow and enable clean hydrogen to serve the role that it's supposed to.
Good. Thank you, ma'am. And batting cleanup, Ms. Regitsky.
Thank you, Senator.
Dr. Regitsky.
Thank you. would certainly agree with what Dr. Ellis and Ms. Angeli have already mentioned on just the opportunity that industrial decarbonization brings for American workers, for the American economy, for really the competitiveness of American industries internationally, as well as all the, community and health benefits as well that will come along. And that the time certainly is now that we have policies in place, thanks to Congress, that's really getting the ball rolling, but we'll need much more. And that this is really going to be a collaboration between the private sector and the public sector. And that innovation is really at the center of it all, and really being able to propel that innovation for these technologies to get us to a net zero industry.
Good, thank you. Well, I want to, in closing, thank each of you, all three of you, two in person, and one remotely. But thank you for joining us today. Thank you even more for sharing your insights and your perspectives on what I think we all realize is a hugely important topic for not just the Congress, but for our country and for our planet. To put it simply, we're all experiencing climate change now through increasingly devastating extreme weather events throughout our planet. To slow climate change, we need to slash greenhouse gas emissions, and 1/3 of the solution lies in our industrial sector, 1/3. And today we've heard some good news. Don't always hear good news here, but today we heard some good news. And by investing in clean, low and zero carbon manufacturing, we are growing good paying jobs, American competitiveness, and our economy, as well as cleaning up local air pollution and fighting the climate crisis. Today's hearing gives us a game plan for what we must do going forward. Before we adjourn, a little bit of housekeeping. And senators who are here or who are not here are welcome to submit additional questions for the record until the close of business on Wednesday, December the 6th. We will compile those questions. We'll send them over to each of our witnesses, and we'll be asking the three of you to reply to us by Wednesday afternoon, December 6th. No, not really. You'll have until Wednesday, December 20th, 2 full weeks. 2 full weeks. So we'll look for some really good answers. But you've given us some really good answers already, and we applaud each of you very much. Thanksgiving's coming up, and it's one of my favorite holidays. I think it's one of our favorite holidays in America. And I hear a lot of people say to me, "Oh, it's never been this bad. It's never been this bad on our planet or on our country or whatever." And I always remind them of things that have been a lot worse. We had a civil war. We lost 1 million men. After that, we followed it up with 2 world wars, Great Depression, when out of every 4 people didn't have a job that wanted a job, and took on communism. We've been through worse than this. But to the extent that we can pull together, share ideas, find ways to harness technology, and really create economic opportunity out of the technology that we're talking about here with clean hydrogen, there's a lot to be happy about and to look forward to. So we'll again compile our questions and send them to you, and look forward to your responding to them by December the 20th. And with that, for everybody, happy Thanksgiving coming up, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the other side. Thanks so much. With that, this hearing is adjourned.